The impacts of rural-urban migration on Shanghai. What has brought on this migration? The changing administration of the Hukou system, monitoring levels of the population, and the rural economic position of those in the outer lying areas. If we look at the first graph, we can see that the population of Shanghai has changed dramatically since 1990. Now, that can be attributed to economic changes and political changes. The economic impact of rural-urban migration. Here, after the 1990s, we can see that there's been an explosion in the domestic output. We witnessed a correlation around 1990 where the population and the gross domestic output has both expanded and grown over time. This increase in labour from the rural areas has allowed an increase in the value added per employee in the secondary and industrial industries in Shanghai when put up against the services industries in Shanghai. Now, we look at the sector breakdown. Despite the fact that Shanghai themselves want to be a city known for their services network, their actual sector breakdown has seen drastic increases in the industrial and the secondary areas. Now, referring back to the previous statement, their GDP per employee is highest in the secondary industries. Now, when we talk about these peasant migrants from the rural area, their only ability to make a living is through dirty, difficult, and dangerous jobs, whereby they cannot, based on the Hukou system, cannot get a higher paid job. Okay, the flooding of rural migrant workers to manufacturing has seen demand for export-oriented production to occur. Now, the Yangtze River Valley provides a gateway to shipping, which opens up the actual city to the rest of the world. Now, this has led to foreign direct investment actually increasing eightfold over the years between 1990 and 1997, whereby the total value of the foreign trade increases almost 3 times the same amount from 1990 to 1997. Now, this can be reflected back to the previous two graphs where the GDP has increased. Now, back from the GDP, we can see that opening on the market to global economic investments, we find that percentage-wise, foreign investment has increased. The foreign investments to the area has been due to the influx in rural-urban migration, whereby migrant workers has attended these manufacturing sites, has resulted in the growth of export-oriented activities, which itself has been the dynamic result of the foreign capital and movement of migrant workers. As a designated new development zone, as previously stated, along the river valley, the foreign investment opportunity provided in the urban development of Shanghai has exhibited the effects of opening the economy to foreign direct investment in a way that the 1990s led to the strengthening of the city's economic basis and enhanced productivity in general. The rural population has been labelled an immense resource. The rural urban migration here has allowed greater amounts of labour to be utilised by both the local economy and the international economy via Shanghai's guaranteed supply of underpriced raw materials, resulted in high returns of capital investment, revenue, and labour productivity in terms of GDP.
So the political impact. Migration in Shanghai is controlled by the Chinese government through the household registration system, or Hukou. In the beginning of Hukou, it was mainly used to monitor the population's migration. It changed. During 1958, the Congress in China changed the legislation, giving the state full control of the migration and employment in both rural and urban residents. This legislation caused division between the rural and urban residents, as urban residents received government benefits and entitlements, while the rural residents were to survive on their own. The Chinese government followed the Soviet model and placed in high priority on heavy industry to speed up its industrialization. The household registration system was passed on from mother to child, thus determining the residence and career of a child since birth. Migrants that were not local residents received little to no access to public schools, welfare benefits, state job opportunities, or housing benefits. For a person to change their Hukou status was through the process of Nong-Zun-Fei, which would change the residence and occupation from agriculture to urban. To be approved, their documents would have to be approved by many government departments, then finally inspected by the police.
So what are the implications on migrants? Well, firstly, the impact of rural-urban migration into Shanghai really has quite a profound impact on migrants. In postmodern Shanghai, a lot of these migrants are coming from rural areas to the city, the urban areas, with a hope for improved employment circumstances and better living conditions. So quite a contrast to what their lifestyle might have been out in rural areas. So often, these hopes might get a little squandered due to when they finally achieve what they've been hoping for, but the quality of the work or the housing isn't quite as lavish or as comfortable as it should be. So firstly, we're going to go through the housing disadvantage. So when these migrants go through the rural-urban migration process, a lot of them do it informally, so without the proper paperwork and whatnot. And what this actually means for them is that they're quite disadvantaged in that they're excluded from these housing distribution systems, which means that their chance and ability to really try and attain home ownership is really, really like it's lowered a lot. Their chances are almost none, which is why so many of these migrants often push towards these private rental options where the space is really limited, and just as you can imagine, living in such a small space is like in the figure you can see that it's 7.79 meters squared, which is really small for these migrants to be living in. A lot of the factors that come into play when migrants decide to choose their option for housing comes down to their duration of stay, their employment status, income level, and family status. Again, coming back to the HUCO system that we've been talking about before. Now, secondly, there's also labor segregation. Now, a lot, if not all, of the rural-urban migrants that come into Shanghai, they will be targeted to be put into low-skill and quite gender-segregated occupational sectors. As we can see here, a lot into construction, manufacturing, trade, quite a few into services, and 11.1% into the others. But as you can see, and I want to highlight this, it's 0.5% into public organization and 3.8% into skilled work, which is extremely low when compared to the locals. So when we're talking about this gender segregation as well, with these two, with this table here, highlighting the male and the female kind of composition of the workforce for migrants, we can see that for men, the industry sector is extremely dominant with masons, plasterers, loaders, porters, carpenters, miners, etc. And another big point to make out is that each one of them is actually greater than 90% dominance in that sector from like male workers. And similarly, but not as extreme, the females actually are also subjected to this kind of extreme gender dominance in the industry, specifically in services. As you can see, 99.1% of domestic workers are female. Specifically, labor migrants make up that 99.1%. Really limits the kind of employment opportunity that these migrants can really try and achieve. As we can see, when it comes to the urban non-migrants, so the locals, a much higher percentage are in professional occupations. As we can see with the males, we have more managers, electrical engineers and managers, just in general, compared to, well, the migrants where there's no data to actually account for it because it's practically none. So in summary, what does that all mean? There's housing disadvantage, unfavorable employment opportunity, and a segregated workforce. And the HUCO system at the moment, similarly with before, it is playing still quite a considerable role in determining these factors, but recently it's been getting better, and these restrictions and limitations on these migrants are being lifted a bit. But again, we're going to need more reforms to really try and hit home for these migrants, because otherwise we're not doing them justice. And really for Shanghai to really get into the global scene and establish themselves as a global presence, they really got to step up their game on this.